have stood in battle, where balls like hail were flying all around me. The man standing next to me was shot by my side. His blood spotted upon my clothes, which I wore for weeks. My nearest blood, except that which runs in my veins, was shed for liberty. Liberty is dear to my heart. I cannot endure the thought that my countrymen should be slaves. Revolutionary War veteran Samuel Harris.
Hello, I'm Colin Powell, and I was an American soldier for 35 years. I was a black American soldier, and I followed in a long tradition of black men and women who have served this nation since long before our Revolutionary War. For so many years, they served their nation without their nation ever serving them. They served because they believed in this nation. They believed in the promise of our democracy. They believed in what the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution said. But for so many years, they were denied the rights and the privileges that other Americans enjoyed. Their story isn't well known. Their story was suppressed. Historians did not write about it well enough. But there's a wonderful story. It is the story of a group of Americans who never lost their love of this country, never lost their faith in what the Founding Fathers had promised. And that's why this story is simply called For Love of Liberty.
To the war has gone. In the ranks of death, you find him. His father's sword has girded on, and his wild huntsman behind him. And no chains shall serve you. The soul of love and bravery. The songs were made for the pure and free. They shall never sound in slavery. Never again.
The record of this nation's African-American servicemen and women is a heroic story draped in irony. Why, despite enormous injustice, did these determined individuals fight so valiantly for freedoms they themselves did not enjoy? The answer to this question can be found in the letters, diaries, thoughts, and reflections of those who were there. Their words are relevant to every American and speak of courage, honor, duty, and sacrifice for love of liberty. I'm Halle Berry, and this is their story.
When Patrick Henry said, "Give me liberty or give me death," Negroes accounted for nearly 20% of America's population. Most were slaves.
I was born on the eastern shore of Maryland in the year of our Lord, 1753, in a state of slavery, and belonged to Francis de Shields. He was a colonel in Washington's army. I was with him through the whole course of the Revolutionary War. There, human blood ran down in torrents till the waters of the river were red as crimson. Revolutionary War veteran James Roberts.
In the spring of 1775, England sent a detachment of 700 men to Concord, Massachusetts, to destroy the colony's military supplies. Paul Revere passed the word that British regulars were coming and Minutemen, both black and white, were waiting for them at Lexington. Prince Estabrook was among those patriots who were wounded. He was a slave.
At Lexington they did appear, arrayed in hostile form. And though our friends were peaceful there, yet on them fell the storm. Thrice happy they who thus resign into the peaceful grave. Much better there, in death confined, than a surviving slave. Poet, soldier, preacher, Lemuel Haynes.
Six days earlier, rebel forces had also been defeated at Gettysburg, and the high tide of the Confederacy began to recede. In South Carolina, the rebel fortification Battery Wagner was Charleston Harbor's first line of defense. The Union Army considered its capture to be essential, and the all-black Massachusetts 54th led the attack to bring it down.
My dear wife, we are on the march to Fort Wagner to storm it. We have just completed a successful retreat from James Island. We fought a desperate battle there Thursday morning. God has protected me through this, my first fiery, leaded trial, and I do give him the glory. First Sergeant Robert Simmons, Massachusetts 54th.
Fort Wagner was located on a barrier island. The earthen installation was defended by 1,700 Confederate troops. When the attack came, some 600 men of the Massachusetts 54th marched across an open beach. The Union soldiers were cut down by a devastating torrent of gunfire. Sergeant Major Lewis Douglas, son of Frederick Douglass, wrote of the slaughter in a letter to his fiancée.
It was terrible. A shell would explode and clear a space of 20 feet. Our men would close up again, but it was no use. How I got out of that fight alive, I cannot tell. But I am here. Remember, if I die in a good cause. Sergeant Major Lewis Douglas.
272 members of the 54th were either killed or wounded in the attack. The unit's commanding officer, 25-year-old Colonel Robert Shaw, was one of those who lost his life.
We were exposed to a murderous fire from the battery of the fort. Mortal men could not stand such a fire. When the men saw their gallant leader fall, they made a desperate effort to get him out. But they were shot down or reeled in the ditch below. Corporal James Gooding.
When the color bearer was wounded, Private William Carney raced forward to rescue the American flag. As the former slave fought his way back to the Union lines, he was shot in the head, chest, right arm, and both legs. Despite his wounds, the 23-year-old soldier staggered into camp, clutching the bloody flag. His surviving comrades broke into cheers as William Carney proudly exclaimed,
"Boys, I did my duty. The dear old flag never touched the ground." Private William Carney.
For his actions that day, William Carney was awarded the Medal of Honor.
I decided I could best serve my God by serving my country and my oppressed brothers. Private William Carney.
On the night of May 14th, 1918, Privates Henry Johnson and Needham Roberts were standing watch when a grenade landed in their trench. Private Needham was badly wounded and Henry Johnson was left to face a German patrol on his own. One of the unit's white officers, Major Arthur Little, would later tell his story.
The little soldier from Albany came down like a wildcat upon the shoulders of the German. As Johnson sprang, he unsheathed his bolo knife, and as his knife landed upon the shoulders of that ill-fated Boche, the blade of the knife was buried to the hilt through the crown of the German's head. Major Arthur Little, 369th Infantry Division.
In fierce hand-to-hand combat, the former red-cap porter of the New York Central Railroad single-handedly wounded or killed 24 enemy soldiers. Back in America, the story was front-page news. The press called the incident the Battle of Henry Johnson.
Having shot one of his foe down and clubbed another with the butt of his rifle, He sprang to the aid of Roberts with his bolo knife. As the enemy fell into disorderly retreat, Johnson, 3 times wounded, sank to the ground, seized a grenade alongside his prostrate body, and literally blew one of the fleeing Germans to fragments. Martin Green, The New York Evening World.
2 days later, the men were presented with the French Medal of Honor, the Croix de Guerre. They were the first American soldiers, black or white, to be so honored in World War I. When asked about the event, Henry Johnson said,
"There isn't so much to tell. Just fought for my life. A rabbit would have done that." Private Henry Johnson.
In August of 1944, the Buffalo Soldiers arrived in Italy. Ulysses Lee, the official government historian for the employment of Negro troops during World War II, was there.
As the thousands of black fighting men debarked from the crowded troop ships, they presented an impressive and awe-inspiring spectacle. Armed with basic weapons and full-field battle dress, proudly wearing the circular shoulder patch with the black buffalo, they moved smartly and efficiently into their unit formations. As they marched away, every man in step, every weapon in place, chins up and eyes forward, a low rumbling babble of sound came from the troops on the dock, then swelled to a crescendo of thunderous cheering, which continued until the last Buffalo unit had disappeared from sight. Ulysses Lee.
The unit's white commander, General Edward Almond, didn't want the men.
I did not send for you. Your Negro newspapers, Negro politicians, and white friends have insisted on your seeing combat. And I shall see to it that you get combat and your share of casualties. General Edmund Almond.
The 92nd Infantry battled some of Germany's best trained troops as they fought their way through Italy. In letters home, soldiers like 2nd Lieutenant Spencer Moore would write of their combat experiences.
Dear Mom and Pop, we've been on the line for 82 days, and I don't know when we're gonna get relieved. The men are lousy, sick, frostbitten, shell-shocked, and scared. It's no joke to see men you've known, lived with, eaten with, and slept with, blown up or shot down before your eyes. Well, Mom, Jerry's beginning a shell again, so I'll sign off for now. Your loving son, Spencer.
The day after Christmas, 2 platoons of Buffalo soldiers awoke to the sound of mortar fire. The area was swarming with Nazi troops, and within a few hours, the men were fighting for their lives. Nearby, Lieutenant John Fox was calling in artillery coordinates so that others could escape. As the shells moved closer and closer to his position, the officer in charge, Major Otis Zachary, who was also one of his best friends, refused to fire. The Germans were closing in. Lieutenant Fox radioed back.
Fire it.
No one survived who saw what happened next. But after the battle, a local priest reported seeing the body of John Fox surrounded by more than 100 dead enemy soldiers. Of the 95 American and Italian defenders, 18 made it back alive.
It was rough, but we were dedicated. We were fighting for a greater cause, for our people. We had to defeat them, and we had to prove that blacks would fight. If we failed, the whole black race would fail. We were fighting for the flag and for our rights. Sergeant James Tillman.
was at the Battle of Chipori that Sergeant Cornelius Charlton became the Korean War's second Black Medal of Honor recipient. Weeks earlier, he had asked to be relieved of his administrative duties so that he could go to the front and fight. He told his commanding officer,
"I just don't feel right sitting here while others are doing the fighting up north." Sergeant Cornelius Charlton.
He got his wish on June the 2nd, 1951, when he was ordered to attack a heavily defended hostile fortification. When the unit's platoon leader was badly wounded, Sergeant Charlton took charge, rallied the troops, and initiated 3 separate attacks. After suffering a serious chest wound, he refused medical attention. Holding his injuries with one hand and his rifle in the other, Cornelius Charlton charged into the firefight, bleeding from more than a dozen wounds. Blasting away, he continued his direct frontal assault until an enemy grenade brought him down. He died quietly next to the bunker he had just destroyed. At his funeral in West Virginia, the soldier's father was heard to say,
"The death of my boy distinctly makes a liar out of those who have said the Negro will not fight for our country. Those who have felt that the Negro is a second-class citizen must know in their hearts that this isn't so." Mr. Van Charlton.
Medical duty in Vietnam was dangerous work, and in many of the frontline military hospitals, African-American nurses ministered to wounded soldiers.